Well, I think it's difficult to know before the administration actually starts, particularly because events in the Middle East are moving at a very rapid pace. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria, for example, is a major development. It's another weakening of Iran's power in the region after Israel has almost demolished Hamas and Hezbollah. And I think it shows that really Iran has been set back very substantially. But the question is, after Donald Trump is inaugurated on January the 20th, will Israel take the next step and attack Iran's nuclear weapons program? President Biden would certainly discourage Israel from doing that, but President Trump could give Israel a green light, which would obviously be a very significant development and I think further weaken the Iranian regime. And it's the Iranian regime that's really the major problem in the region at the moment. Well, it depends in part on what happens to the regime in Iran, what happens with President Erdogan of Turkey, who clearly has his own aspirations in northern Syria against the Kurds in Turkey and northern Syria and Iraq. So there's still a lot of instability, and there's still many threats in the region. If the HTS terrorist group in Damascus turns out still to be a terrorist group, that would be bad for everyone in Syria. So the shape of things in the Middle East is hard to see, as I mentioned, because history is moving so quickly. But it remains dangerous for the interest of America and its friends and allies. That's for certain. Well, I think there are many people who may serve in the Trump administration and considerable support in Congress to recognize an independent Kurdish state. That's been my view for a long time, but I think the possibilities here are perhaps greater because of what Israel has done to Iran and its terrorist proxies already. So it's a very turbulent situation with a lot of opportunities for a separate Kurdish state, but obviously also a lot of obstacles still to be overcome. Well, I think that question remains undecided. I don't think Trump himself knows. And I think that's why the danger to the SDF forces in northeastern Syria is very important. If Erdogan says to Trump after January the 20th, as he did to Trump back in 2018 and 2019, that he wants Turkey to handle matters in northern Syria, that could be very damaging to the Kurdish forces there. We just don't know what Trump will say this time. He's focused on other matters, but events may be moving so quickly that he'll have to answer that question soon after he's inaugurated. Well, I think that the U.S. policy should be to make sure that HTS does not gain control of the entire country if it remains a terrorist group. I think U.S. forces should remain in northeastern Syria alongside the SDF, which is still guarding 10 to 12,000 ISIS prisoners. And I think the U.S. should stay at Atanf as well. It's just not clear whether this new government in Damascus has really given up its terrorist background. They say that they have, but I think they still haven't demonstrated sufficiently, to me at least, that that's a serious commitment. Well, I think because of Turkey's aggressive behavior in northern Syria, which we've seen over an extended period of time, there's a real risk that Erdogan's ambitions could cause real problems. I certainly hope one sign of whether HTS has gotten serious is if they tell the Russians to leave the Tartus naval station and the air base in Latakia. I don't think the U.S. wants to replace Russia. I think what we'd like to see is a stable, non-terrorist state bordering, obviously, Israel and Lebanon and Jordan, and one that would be hostile to ISIS at the same time, and for Turkey to remain within its borders. That is one way to help create conditions for an independent Kurdish state, but this is not necessarily going to be easy to accomplish. Right. Well, we don't know what Trump will do. His inclination may be to withdraw. I think that would be a mistake, as it was in 2019, and why ultimately I think he was persuaded to stay. But it's a lot depends on the conditions in Syria, and I think a lot depends on what Israel does with Iran. If Israel attacks Iran's nuclear program, we'll have to see if Iran responds, or if this time the people of Iran are able to exploit fractures in the top of the Iranian government and maybe the regime falls. That would be the best thing for the people of Iran, the best thing for peace and security in the Middle East. Well, I think they should make it very clear that any further attacks on American positions will be met with a devastating retaliation. I think Biden has handled this wrong. Instead of waiting until Americans are actually killed, the attacks on both military and civilian facilities in Iraq is an act of war against the United States. And whether it's Shia militia acting on their own or Shia militia acting at the direction of Iran, it's not acceptable, and we should not tolerate it the way we have, particularly since the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th. This is something that Iran, the government, as long as it lasts in Tehran, needs to understand that we do not accept that our personnel are just there as targets. I think certainly Hamas is very, very weak. I think Hezbollah has been damaged. I don't think the job is finished there. But, it's not just for the security of Israel, but for the people of Gaza and Lebanon, respectively. Until Hamas and Hezbollah are eliminated, they can never have a vision of a peaceful, secure future. So work remains to be done. But the harm that's been caused to those terrorist groups, obviously the fall of Assad, I think all has shown the balance of power in the Middle East is changing dramatically, and the regime in Iran itself is now in jeopardy. Well, I think the attacks on the Houthis should be intensified, not just because the Houthis have been attacking Israel with drones and missiles, but because they've effectively closed the Suez Canal, Red Sea maritime passage, and that is a violation of freedom of the seas. It's been a principle of American foreign policy since we were still colonies of Great Britain. I think clearly Iran is the major, maybe almost the exclusive supplier of missiles and drones to the Houthis, and I think the Iranians need to pay a price for that too. That maritime passageway needs to be opened again. Well, it's not that we have a long target list, but I think if the Israelis attack Iran's nuclear program, that the potential for the regime fracturing there and falling, the Ayatollahs being overthrown, and giving the people a chance to install a new government is very real. And I think we ought to help the opposition in Iran, not to the point where we become heavily involved, but I think it's really up to the people of Iran to take the initiative. But if we can give them help that achieves the overthrow of the Ayatollahs, I certainly think we should give it.